A mother's love knows no limits, especially when her unborn child's safety hangs in the balance. Sofia Clarke, 7 months pregnant, sits wrapped in a blanket in her destroyed living room after another brutal attack from her husband. Broken. Glass covers the floor. Furniture is overturned. She dials 911 for the 4th time in 2 years, but this call is different. This time she's not just scared, she's done. Officer Ruiz sits across from Sofia in the chaos of what was once a home. He has seen cases like this before. Women who call for help, then refuse to press charges when the moment comes. But looking at Sofia now, he sees something unexpected. A woman ready to fight for her future and her baby's life. Sofia has finally found the courage to break free from years of abuse. The question is, will she have the strength to see it through? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blood-stained wedding ring on Sofia's swollen finger told a story she'd spent 8 years trying to rewrite. As Officer Miguel Ruiz documented the scene, Sofia touched the simple gold band with trembling fingers. It had once symbolized love and promise. Now it served as evidence of how forever could become a prison. Mrs. Clarke, can you tell me what happened tonight? Officer Ruiz's voice carried gentle authority. Sofia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her other hand protecting her rounded belly. The pregnancy journal lay scattered among the debris, one page containing her latest entry. 7 months today. She's going to be strong, stronger than her mother. He came home drunk, Sofia began quietly. Lost the Morrison contract today. Officer Ruiz had learned to listen not just to what victims said, but to what they didn't say. Sofia's careful words spoke of years of practice in minimizing and excusing. 8 years ago, Sofia Martinez had been different. A 3rd-grade teacher, with her own car, bank account, and Friday nights with friends. David Clarke had seemed charming at first, protective rather than controlling. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. By their 1st anniversary, Sofia had quit teaching. By their 2nd, she'd lost most friends. The 1st time he'd pushed her, David had cried afterward, promising it would never happen again. Tonight felt different. Usually victims were already building walls of excuses by the time Ruiz arrived. Sofia seemed to be tearing that wall down instead. She kicked when he hit me, Sofia said quietly. My baby girl kicked like she was trying to protect me. I realized that in 4 months, I'm going to be responsible for keeping her safe. How can I do that if I can't even keep myself safe? The pregnancy had been unexpected after years of trying. As Sofia's body changed, David's psychological control had intensified, monitoring every bite she ate, every mile she walked. I started keeping a journal when I found out I was pregnant, Sofia continued. I wanted to document everything for her. But I started writing down other things too, the bruises, the nights I went to bed hungry because David said I was gaining too much weight. Tonight, when his hand connected with my face, I thought about my daughter growing up thinking this is what love looks like. For years, Sofia had convinced herself that her suffering was contained, but a child changed everything. Are you ready to press charges against David tonight? The question hung in the air like a bridge Sofia had been approaching for years. She looked around the destroyed living room. Their wedding photo lay face down, its frame cracked. Yes, she said, stronger than expected. I want to press charges. As Officer Ruiz called for backup, Sofia reached for her phone with steady hands. For the first time in years, she was making a choice, based on hope rather than fear. Her daughter kicked again, a gentle reminder of the life growing inside her. Sofia felt something she'd almost forgotten. Determination. She was going to break the cycle, not just for herself, but for the little girl who deserved to grow up believing she was worth protecting. Relationship. When Sofia suggested keeping her own bank account, David looked wounded. Didn't she trust him to provide for her? By their 1st anniversary, Sofia had quit teaching, By their second, she'd lost touch with most of her friends. By their third, she rarely left the house without David's explicit approval. The verbal attacks had started in year 4, cutting comments about her appearance, her intelligence, her worth. The first time he'd pushed her, David had cried afterward, promising it would never happen again. He'd been under so much stress with work, he'd said. She brought out feelings in him that scared him, he'd said. He loved her too much, he'd said. The cycle became as predictable as seasons. Tension would build over days or weeks. David would explode, usually triggered by some perceived slight or external stress. Then came the honeymoon period. Flowers, apologies, promises, and just enough tenderness to make Sofia believe this time would be different. Officer Ruiz had seen this pattern countless times, but tonight felt different. Usually by the time he arrived, victims were already building the wall of excuses that would protect their abuser. Sofia seemed to be tearing that wall down instead. "Mrs. Clarke, has your husband hit you before tonight?" Sofia's laugh was bitter, unexpected. "Officer, you've been to this house 3 times in the past 2 years. You know he has." It was true. Miguel Ruiz remembered each call. The first time, Sofia had claimed she'd fallen down the stairs. The second, she'd said she'd walked into a door. The third time, 18 months ago, she'd admitted David had pushed her during an argument, but she'd refused to press charges. Tonight felt like the end of something, rather than another repetition. "What's different about tonight, Sofia?" Ruiz asked gently, using her first name deliberately. Sometimes formality created distance when what victims needed was human connection. Sofia's hand moved to her belly again, and her expression hardened with a resolve Ruiz recognized. He'd seen it in his sister Maria's eyes 20 years ago, during the phone call that would be her last. Maria had called him from a hospital bed, her voice steady despite the pain medication. "Miguel," she'd said, "I'm finally done. I'm going." To leave him. 2 days later, her boyfriend had killed her rather than let her go. "She kicked when he hit me," Sofia said quietly. "My baby girl kicked like she was trying to protect me, and I realized that in 4 months I'm going to be responsible for keeping her safe. How can I do that if I can't even keep myself safe?" The Kaiji pregnancy had been unexpected, coming after years of trying and multiple miscarriages that David had somehow blamed on Sofia's inadequacy as a woman. When the doctor had confirmed the pregnancy at 12 weeks, Sofia had felt a joy so profound it physically hurt. But with that joy came a terrifying awareness. She was no longer making decisions just for herself. David's reaction to the pregnancy had been complex. Initially, he'd been elated, talking about his son and the legacy he would build. When they'd learned the baby was a girl, his enthusiasm had dimmed noticeably. Girls were complicated, he'd said. Girls required protection he wasn't sure he could provide. As Sofia's body changed, David's violence had actually decreased, but his psychological control had intensified. He monitored every bite she ate, every meal she walked, every doctor's appointment she attended. "I started keeping a journal when I found out I was pregnant," Sofia continued, gesturing toward the scattered pages. "I wanted to document everything for her. Her first kicks, her hiccups, the way she moves when I listen to music. But somewhere along the way, I started writing down other things too. The bruises that took too long to fade. The nights I went to bed hungry because David said I was gaining too much weight. The way I practiced smiling in the mirror so no one would ask questions." Officer Ruiz followed her gaze to the pregnancy journal. Among the scattered pages he could see Sofia's careful handwriting documenting a dual reality, the wonder of creating life alongside the horror of barely living. "My sister Emma has been calling every day since I told her about the baby," Sofia said. "She lives in Denver now, has 3 kids of her own. She keeps asking when she can visit, when she can throw me a baby shower. I've been making excuses for months because I know the moment she sees me, really sees me, she'll know. Tonight, when David's hand connected with my face, I thought about Emma's daughters. I thought about them visiting their Aunt Sofia and seeing their Uncle David lose his. temper. I thought about my daughter growing up thinking this is what love looks like. The weight of that realization seemed to settle over Sofia like a mantle. For years, she'd convinced herself that her suffering was contained, that she was the only casualty of David's rage. But a child changed the mathematics of acceptable risk entirely. Officer Ruiz had dealt with enough domestic violence cases to know that the most dangerous time for a victim was often when they decided to leave. Abusers escalated when they sensed their control slipping, but he also knew that sometimes a woman found a strength in motherhood that she couldn't access for herself. Sofia, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you ready to press charges against David tonight? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge Sofia had been approaching for years, but never quite had the courage to cross. She looked around the destroyed living room. Their wedding photo lay face down on the floor, its frame cracked, the glass reflecting the overhead light in fractured pieces. Yes, she said. And the word came out stronger than she'd expected. Yes, I want to press charges. Officer Ruiz nodded, making a note in his report. We'll need to take photographs of your injuries, and you'll need a medical examination. Are you experiencing any pain or complications from the pregnancy after tonight's attack? Sofia hadn't really considered this. The adrenaline had masked most physical sensations beyond the immediate sting of David's hand across her face and the ache in her ribs where he'd shoved her into the coffee table. I don't think so, she said uncertainly. She's still moving normally, but maybe I should see a doctor just to be sure. Absolutely. We'll get you to the hospital tonight. Is there someone you can call to stay with you? Someone David doesn't have access to? My sister, Sofia said immediately. Emma, she's always said I could come to Denver if I needed to. I just never thought I'd actually take her up on it. As Officer Ruiz called for an ambulance and backup, Sofia reached for her phone with hands that no longer trembled. For the first time in years, she was making a choice based on hope rather than fear. The road ahead would be difficult. She had no illusions about that. David wouldn't simply let her go. The legal system would demand strength she wasn't sure she possessed. Financial independence seemed like an impossible dream when she hadn't worked in years. But as her daughter kicked again, a gentle reminder of the life growing inside her, Sofia felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: determination. She was going to break the cycle that had trapped her, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of the little girl who deserved to grow up believing she was worth protecting. The sound of sirens grew closer, bringing with them the promise of a different kind of future. Sofia closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever forces in the universe protected mothers and daughters, asking for the strength to see this through to the end. The Morrison construction contract had been David's lifeline, a project that would have covered their debts and allowed Sofia to prepare for the baby. When he'd stormed into Murphy's bar, clutching the rejection letter, his drinking started early and hard. Sofia had been assembling the crib Emma shipped from Denver when she heard David's truck in the driveway, engine revving unnecessarily. The surprise gift had arrived with a note. Every princess needs her castle. The business contract lay crumpled on the kitchen counter. Sofia had smoothed it out and read the rejection. Morrison Development chose a younger firm with more innovative approaches. Sofia understood David's frustration, but she saw opportunity where he saw failure. Maybe this was the universe pushing David towards something better, counseling or an honest conversation about their marriage. Where the hell is my dinner? David's voice carried from the kitchen, thick with alcohol and resentment. Sofia made her way downstairs carefully, one hand on the railing. I made your favorite, Sofia said, opening the oven to reveal pot roast. It's been staying warm since 6. David swayed by the refrigerator, work clothes dirty, eyes unfocused. You know what this means? We're screwed. The bank payment is due next week. Sofia had heard this speech dozens of times. David's business operated on thin margins, stress that seemed to justify his erratic behavior. But tonight, With their daughter moving in her womb, Sofia responded differently. "David, maybe this is a sign," she said gently. "Maybe it's time to get help, for the drinking, the anger. We're going to be parents soon." The plate shattered against the wall before Sofia could finish. Gravy scattered across the yellow wallpaper Sofia had hung when she still believed they could build a happy home. "Help!" David roared. "I've been busting my ass for 8 years, and this is the thanks I get." Sofia felt her daughter kick hard, responding to stress hormones. "That's not what I meant. You know what the problem is? You, always doubting me." David followed her toward the living room, movements unsteady but purposeful. His hand connected with her cheek so hard Sofia's vision went white. The force sent her stumbling into the coffee table, hip catching the sharp corner. For seconds, only Sofia's ragged breathing and the antique clock's ticking filled the silence. Then Sofia felt something that cut through her shock, her daughter's distressed movement, rapid kicks that seemed to say, "Mama, what's happening?" Something fundamental shifted in Sofia's consciousness. For 8 years, she'd absorbed David's violence, thinking herself strong enough to handle it. But her daughter was utterly dependent on Sofia's choices. Sofia struggled to her feet, one hand on her belly, the other wiping blood from her split lip. "Get out," she said quietly. "This is my house," David said, stepping closer. "I pay the mortgage. You don't get to tell me to leave." "And this is my body," Sofia replied, hand protective over her belly. "And my baby. Get out before I call the police." David's laugh was ugly. "You won't call the cops. You never do." But Sofia was already moving toward the phone. For the first time in years, she wasn't calculating consequences. She was acting on instinct, the need to protect her child. "Sofia, put down that phone." Sofia dialed 911, looking directly at David. "I need the police. My husband attacked me. I'm 7 months pregnant and need help." "You're making a mistake," David said, backing toward the door. "You think you can make it without me." "This is your child too," Sofia said, but David was grabbing his keys. "Not anymore," he said. "You made your choice." The door slammed, rattling. "Windows?" Sofia sank onto the couch, still gripping the phone. The house felt different, lighter but more fragile. For the first time in years, Sofia could breathe fully. They were alone now, mother and daughter, facing an uncertain future, but facing it together. Emma's guest bedroom had lavender walls and white furniture. Sofia had been staring at the ceiling for 3 hours, listening to her sister's family move through their morning routine downstairs. The sounds of normal family life felt both comforting and alien after years of walking on eggshells. The restraining order papers lay on the nightstand next to water Emma insisted Sofia keep nearby. The legal documents felt both substantial and fragile, protection that existed only as long as David chose to respect it. Sofia's phone buzzed with another text from David's mother, Margaret. "Sofia, honey, surely we can work this out as a family." The messages had been coming every few hours since word of David's arrest spread. Emma appeared with a breakfast tray. "You slept through breakfast," she said. "When's the last time you slept 8 hours straight?" Sofia couldn't remember. Even before last night's violence, David's presence had meant constant vigilance, monitoring his breathing to gauge his mood, staying perfectly still to avoid waking him. "Emma, what if I've made a terrible mistake? What if David's right? And I can't make it on my own?" Emma's expression shifted to something fiercer. "Do you remember when you taught me to ride a bike? You told me that being scared was normal, but letting fear stop me from trying would be the real tragedy. The pregnancy." Journal sat on the dresser, its pages carefully smoothed and reordered. Emma had spent an hour organizing the scattered entries. "I called the prosecutor's office," Emma said carefully. "Sarah Martinez wants to meet with you this afternoon. David's been charged with domestic violence and violation of a restraining order." Sofia's stomach clenched. Her private pain would become public record, where she'd have to speak her truth to strangers. Dr. Patricia Henderson's prenatal clinic was 20 minutes from Emma's house. Sophia had been dreading this appointment, the first medical examination since David's attack. Dr. Henderson conducted the examination with professional thoroughness, checking Sophia's blood pressure and listening to the baby's heartbeat. "Your daughter sounds perfect," Dr. Henderson announced, and Sophia felt tears of relief. Strong heartbeat, good movement. "However, I am concerned about your stress levels. I want to refer you to Dr. Rebecca Torres," Dr. Henderson continued. "She specializes in trauma counseling for women who've experienced domestic violence." That afternoon, in Sarah Martinez's office, Sophia told her story to another stranger. The prosecutor was younger than expected, with sharp eyes that made every detail seem important. "David has a history of minor infractions," Sarah explained. "Bar fights, arguments with neighbors. But this is his first domestic violence charge." Sophia studied the restraining order papers again, official language that reduced her 8-year marriage to legal prohibitions. David was forbidden from contacting her, from coming within 500 feet, from possessing firearms. Sophia's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Sarah gestured for her to answer. "Sophia, it's me." David's voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. "I'm calling from a friend's phone. We need to talk." "David, you're not supposed to contact me. The restraining order—" "Forget the restraining order," David interrupted. "This is about our family. You can't seriously think you're going to raise my daughter without me." "I have to go," Sophia said, ending the call with hands that shook only slightly. "That was smart," Sarah said, already calling police. "David will be arrested again within the hour for violating the order." But driving back to Emma's house, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that David's call had been a test. Not of the legal system's ability to protect her, but of her own resolve to stay. Protected. Emma's photo albums were scattered across the dining room table, like pieces of a puzzle Sophia had forgotten how to solve. Each picture told a story of the woman she'd been before David. Confident, smiling, surrounded by friends and colleagues who'd seen her as someone worth knowing. "Look at this one," Emma said, pointing to a photo from Sophia's first-year teaching. 26-year-old Sophia stood in front of her classroom, arms around 2 students, her face glowing with the satisfaction of work that mattered. "You won Teacher of the Year that spring, remember? The principal said you had a gift for reaching kids other teachers had given up on." Sophia traced her finger along the photo's edge, trying to reconcile that confident young woman with the person she'd become. "I felt so proud that day, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." "You were," Emma said simply, "and you can be again." The phone rang, interrupting their trip down memory lane. Emma checked the caller ID and frowned. "It's Margaret," she said, referring to David's mother. "Do you want me to—" "I'll take it," Sophia said, surprising herself. For years, she'd let David handle all communication with his family, another small surrender in a war of attrition that had slowly erased her voice from her own life. "Sophia, dear." Margaret's voice carried the syrupy sweetness she used when delivering criticism disguised as concern. "I've been so worried about you. David is beside himself, you know. He says you've gotten some very bad advice from lawyers who don't understand your situation." Sophia looked at Emma, who was making exaggerated gagging motions behind the phone. Despite everything, Sophia almost smiled. "Margaret, David violated a restraining order. He was arrested again yesterday." "Oh, that's just a misunderstanding," Margaret said quickly. "He was trying to work things out, to save your marriage. Surely you can see that. Family is everything, Sophia. Whatever problems you two are having, they can be solved if you're both willing to try." Sophia felt the familiar tug of guilt that Margaret's words were designed to trigger. For years, David's family had positioned Sophia as the difficult one, the outsider who didn't understand their close-knit dynamic. They'd never openly blamed her for David's problems, but they'd made it clear that a better wife would have found ways to prevent them. "Margaret," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt, "David hit me while I was pregnant. He destroyed our living room and threatened our unborn child. These aren't marriage problems. This is abuse." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had lost its sweetness entirely. "I don't know what those lawyers have told you, but you're making a terrible mistake. David loves you, but he's always provided for you. Now you're going to destroy your family over one bad night." "One bad night?" Sofia's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "Margaret, this has been going on for years. You know it has. You've seen the bruises. You've heard the arguments. Marriage is hard work," Margaret replied, falling back on the script Sofia had heard dozens of times. "My generation understood that. We didn't run to lawyers the first time our husbands raised their voices." After Sofia hung up, she sat staring at the photos spread before her. Here was evidence of a life lived fully. Birthday parties with friends, hiking trips, dinner parties where she'd cooked elaborate meals because she enjoyed the creativity, not because someone would punish her if she failed. Emma returned from putting her youngest down for a nap and found Sofia crying over a picture from her college graduation. "What did she say to you?" "The same things David always said," Sofia replied, wiping her eyes. "That I'm overreacting, that good wives don't abandon their families, that I'll never find anyone else who'll put up with me." Emma sat down and pulled the photo album closer. "Do you see this picture?" She pointed to a snapshot from Sofia's 28th birthday party. Sofia was laughing at something off camera, her whole face lit up with genuine joy. "This is who you are. Not the shadow David turned you into, but this, vibrant, funny, intelligent kind." That afternoon, Emma's friend Karen stopped by with her teenage daughter, Madison. Karen taught at the same high school where Sofia had once dreamed of working, before David convinced her that elementary school was more appropriate for a future mother. "Emma told me you're thinking about getting back into teaching," Karen said, as they sat on the back patio watching Madison push Emma's youngest on the swing set. "The district is always looking for experienced teachers, especially ones with your background in special education." Sofia felt a flutter of possibilities she hadn't experienced in years. "I don't know if I remember how to be a teacher. It's been so long." "Teaching isn't something you forget," Karen said confidently. "It's like riding a bike, except the bike changes people's lives." Madison bounded over, all teenage energy and enthusiasm. "Miss Emma says you used to teach kids like me," she said, referring to her learning disability that had made traditional classroom approaches challenging. "That's so cool. I wish I had teachers who really got it, you know." Later that evening, Sofia found herself alone in Emma's study, staring at her teaching certificate hanging on the wall next to Emma's family photos. Emma had framed it years ago as a reminder, she'd said, of Sofia's accomplishments. Now it felt like a message from her former self, proof that she'd once been someone capable of independence and professional success. Her pregnancy journal lay open beside her laptop as Sofia began writing an entry she'd been avoiding for weeks. "Today, I remembered that I used to be good at something besides surviving. I used to wake up excited about the day ahead, knowing that I had work that mattered and people who counted on me. David convinced me that I was too fragile for that world, too emotional and unpredictable to handle real responsibility. But looking at pictures of who I was, I can see that he was wrong. I wasn't fragile. I was strong enough to care deeply about things beyond myself. My daughter kicks the strongest when I'm thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. Maybe she's trying to tell me something. Maybe she knows that the woman in those photos is still in here somewhere, just waiting for permission to emerge again." Sofia's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Torres's office, confirming her first therapy appointment for the following week. She'd almost cancelled 3 times, afraid of what she might learn about herself in the process of healing. But tonight, surrounded by evidence of who she'd been and could be again, Sofia felt ready to begin the work of rebuilding her life. The baby kicked gently, and Sofia placed both hands on her belly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her daughter. "Better than okay. We're going to remember how to be extraordinary." The teaching certificate felt heavier than Sofia remembered as she held it in the principal's office at Maplewood Elementary School. Dr. Janet Phillips, a woman in her 50s, with steel-grey hair and laugh lines that spoke of decades spent with children, reviewed Sofia's transcripts with the thoroughness of someone who took hiring seriously. "Your references from Roosevelt Elementary are outstanding," Dr. Phillips said, looking up from the file. "But it's been 8 years since you've been in a classroom. What makes you think you're ready to come back now?" Sofia's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her daughter had been especially active all morning. "I'm about to become a mother myself," she said carefully. "I think I understand children differently now than I did before, not just as students, but as whole human beings who deserve to feel safe and valued." Dr. Phillips nodded thoughtfully. "We have a long-term substitute position opening in our special education program. The teacher is out on extended medical leave, and we need someone who can step in immediately. It's challenging work. These are kids who've been failed by the system before. They don't trust easily. I specialized in learning disabilities during my training," Sofia replied, feeling a spark of the enthusiasm she'd thought David had extinguished forever. "I believe every child can learn when they're taught in the way that works for them." 2 days later, Sofia stood outside David's bail, hearing with Sarah Martinez, watching him shuffle into the courtroom in county jail clothes. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing without his work boots, and the confidence that came from being on familiar ground. When he saw Sofia in the gallery, his expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something that might have been genuine, hurt. "The defendant is charged with violation of a restraining order and contempt of court," the judge announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen this scenario play out hundreds of times. "Mr. Clarke, you contacted the protected party directly, which is a clear violation of the order issued 3 days ago." David's lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, my client was attempting to reconcile with his pregnant wife. His actions, while technically in violation of the order, were motivated by concern for his family's welfare." Sofia felt Sarah's hand touch her arm in warning as rage flared in her chest. Even here, in a courtroom designed to provide justice, David's violence was being reframed as love, his control disguised as concern. "Mr. Clarke," the judge said, looking directly at David, "do you understand that a restraining order means no contact whatsoever? No calls, no texts, no messages through third parties?" "Yes, sir," David replied, but Sofia could see the familiar stubborn set of his jaw that usually preceded an explosion. "Bail is set at $15,000, the judge announced. "The defendant is ordered to attend anger management counseling and submit to random alcohol testing as conditions of release." As they left the courthouse, Sarah explained the reality of what they'd just witnessed. "He'll probably make bail within 24 hours. His family will pool resources, they always do. The question is whether he'll comply with the conditions, or whether he'll see them as suggestions rather than requirements." That afternoon, Sofia began her first day back in a classroom in 8 years. The special education wing of Maplewood Elementary hummed with a different energy than she remembered from her previous teaching experience. These were children who'd been labeled difficult, disruptive, unteachable, words Sofia had heard applied to herself in different contexts. "Ms. Sofia," said Marcus, a 10-year-old with ADHD who'd been suspended from 3 schools before landing at Maplewood, "are you really going to stay? Or are you just another teacher who's going to leave when we get too hard to handle?" The directness of his question caught Sofia off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because that's what always happens," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "Teachers come in all excited about helping us, then they figure out we're actually messed up, and they find reasons to leave." Sofia knelt down to Marcus's eye level, feeling her daughter kick as if in response to the conversation. "I'm not going anywhere, Marcus. I know what it feels like when people give up on you. I promise you that won't happen here." Over the next weeks, Sofia threw herself into teaching with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. She arrived early, stayed late, and spent evenings creating individualized learning plans for each of her 12 students. For the first time since her marriage, she felt like herself again, competent, valued, making a difference in the world. But David's presence loomed over everything like a storm cloud that might break at any moment. He'd made bail as predicted, and while he hadn't violated the restraining order again, Sofia felt his eyes on her constantly. He drove past the school during her lunch break. He parked outside Emma's neighborhood, just outside the 500-foot boundary. He was a shadow at the edge of her new life, reminding her that escape was never as simple as changing addresses. Officer Ruiz had taken to checking on Sofia regularly, appearing at the school or at Emma's house with the casual frequency of someone who understood that protection was an ongoing process rather than a one-time event. "How are you holding up?" he asked one afternoon as Sofia loaded teaching supplies into Emma's car. "Better than I expected," Sofia replied honestly. "The kids at school are incredible. They're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them about resilience." "And David?" Sofia glanced around the parking lot instinctively before answering. "He's following the letter of the law while violating its spirit. He's not contacting me directly, but he's making sure I know he's watching." Officer Ruiz nodded grimly. "That's what they do. They probe for weaknesses in the system, test how much they can get away with before anyone takes action." "But Sofia, the fact that you're building a life despite his intimidation, that's powerful. That's what strength looks like." That evening, Sofia attended her first group counseling session with Dr. Torres. The circle of women ranged in age from early 20s to late 60s, but they shared the same cautious expression Sofia recognized from her own mirror, the look of people who'd learned to scan every room for exits. "Today, I want to talk about reclaiming your identity," Dr. Torres said, her voice gentle but firm. "Abusers systematically dismantle their victims' sense of self. Recovery means deliberately rebuilding who you are, apart from that relationship." Sofia thought about Marcus's question, whether she was really going to stay when things got difficult. The irony wasn't lost on her that a 10-year-old had articulated the central challenge of her own life, learning to believe that she deserved permanence, stability, and care that didn't come with conditions. As the session ended, Sofia felt her daughter's familiar kicks, steady and strong. In 2 months, she would be responsible for showing another human being what love looked like. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and clarifying. She had to become the kind of person she wanted her daughter to admire, the kind of mother who chose courage over comfort and truth over temporary peace. The ultrasound photo was tucked into Sofia's pregnancy journal like a bookmark, marking the most important chapter of her life. At 34 weeks, her daughter's profile was clearly visible: a button nose, perfectly formed lips, and tiny fingers that seemed to wave at the camera. Dr. Henderson had printed extra copies, and Sofia found herself pulling them out throughout the day, amazed that something so perfect could exist, despite everything that had brought them to this moment. "She looks like you," Emma said, studying the image over Sofia's shoulder as they prepared dinner in Emma's kitchen. "Same stubborn chin." Sofia laughed, feeling her daughter shift in response to the sound. "I hope she gets my stubbornness and none of my tendency to doubt myself." The prenatal classes Sofia had enrolled in met twice a week in the basement of St. Mary's Hospital. She'd been nervous about attending alone. Most of the other couples arrived together, comparing notes on nursery preparations and birth plans. But she'd quickly discovered that the other mothers welcomed her with a warmth that reminded her why she'd always gravitated toward communities of women. "How are you managing the anxiety?" asked Jennifer, a first-time mother whose husband was deployed overseas. "I keep having nightmares about something going wrong during delivery." Sofia considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, Her biggest fear had been David's reaction if she burned dinner. Now she was worried about bringing a child into a world where monsters sometimes looked like fathers, where love could become a weapon, where the person supposed to protect you might become the greatest threat to your safety. I try to focus on what I can control, Sofia replied. Eating well, getting enough rest, surrounding myself with people who want good things for both of us. The rest I have to trust will work out. Dr. Torres had helped Sofia develop this philosophy during their weekly sessions. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty, she'd explained. After years of unpredictable violence, your nervous system is constantly preparing for attack. We need to retrain your brain to recognize safety when it exists. The irony was that Sofia felt safer than she had in years, despite David's continued presence hovering at the edges of her new life. He'd completed his court-mandated anger management classes, a 6-week program that, according to Sarah Martinez, was notoriously ineffective for serious domestic violence cases. He'd passed his alcohol screening tests, though Sofia suspected he'd simply gotten better at timing his drinking around the random schedule. The psychological evaluation came back, Sarah told Sofia during their weekly check-in at the prosecutor's office. David scored high for narcissistic traits and shows what the psychologist calls limited capacity for genuine empathy, but he's intelligent enough to give the answers he thinks people want to hear. Sofia wasn't surprised. David had always been skilled at presenting different versions of himself depending on his audience. With his construction crews, he was the demanding but fair boss. With clients, he was charming and reliable. With his mother, he was the devoted son who could do no wrong. Only Sofia had seen the real David, the one who emerged behind closed doors when his carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "What does this mean for the case?" Sofia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It means we need your testimony to be absolutely rock solid," Sarah replied. "David's lawyer is going to paint him as a man under extraordinary stress who made a terrible mistake. They'll argue that the pregnancy hormones made you overreact to what was essentially a marital dispute." Sofia felt her daughter kick hard, as if protesting the very suggestion that her existence could somehow justify violence. "And you think that defense might work?" "I think juries are unpredictable, especially when it comes to domestic violence cases involving pregnant women. Some people still believe that family problems should be solved within the family, that involving the legal system is somehow betraying the sanctity of marriage." That evening, Sofia's mother called from Arizona, her voice heavy with worry and confusion. "Mija, I've been talking to Margaret, and she says David is getting help. She says he's changed, that he's been going to church, attending counseling sessions." Sofia closed her eyes, remembering the dozens of similar conversations. Over the years, David's ability to convince others of his reformation was perhaps his greatest talent, more polished than his carpentry skills or his business acumen. "Mom, do you remember when I was 12 and came home with a black eye?" Sofia asked quietly. "You didn't ask me if Tommy Rodriguez was sorry for hitting me. You didn't suggest I try to understand why he'd lost his temper. You marched straight to his house and told his parents that if he ever touched me again, you'd call the police." "That was different," her mother protested. "You were just children. This is your marriage, your family, and this is my daughter." Sofia replied, her hand moving to her belly. "I have to protect her the same way you protected me. I have to show her that no one has the right to hurt us, no matter how sorry they claim to be afterward." After ending the call, Sofia sat in Emma's quiet living room, watching her nephew build elaborate structures with wooden blocks, only to knock them down and start over. There was something profound in his persistence, his faith that each new attempt might create something better than what came before. Sofia pulled out her pregnancy journal and began writing, 8 months pregnant today. Dr. Henderson says you're perfectly positioned for birth, head down, ready to enter the world. I've been thinking about what kind of world I want to give. what kind of mother I want to be. I want to be the kind of mother who shows you that love doesn't hurt, that healthy relationships involve respect, kindness and compromise, not fear, control and submission. I want you to grow up believing that your voice matters, that your boundaries are sacred, that you deserve to be treated with dignity by everyone in your life. Your father's family keeps telling me that forgiveness is divine, that good Christians work through their problems instead of running to lawyers and judges. But I've learned something important these past months. Forgiveness doesn't require putting yourself back in harm's way. I can forgive your father for the pain he's caused while still protecting you from experiencing that same pain. Marcus asked me again today if I was really going to stay at the school. And I realized he was asking the same question I've been asking myself about this new life I'm building. Am I really going to stay committed to being healthy and whole? Or will I retreat back into what's familiar when things get difficult? You kick strongest when I'm thinking about our future together. I think you're trying to tell me that you're counting on me to be brave enough to stay in this new life we're creating. I won't let you down. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw you at the prenatal class tonight. You looked beautiful. Can't wait to meet our daughter. Despite the restraining order, despite the legal consequences he'd already faced, David was still finding ways to remind Sofia that he considered her his property. But instead of the familiar paralyzing fear, Sofia felt something different, a protective fury that started in her core and radiated outward like heat. David might be able to intimidate her, but he would never touch their daughter. Sofia would make sure of that, whatever it took. She forwarded the message to Officer Ruiz and Sarah Martinez, then blocked the unknown number. Tomorrow, there would be consequences for David's violation. Tonight, Sofia would focus on the life growing inside her, the little girl who was depending on her mother's courage to create a world where love was safe and strength was measured not by the ability to control others, but by the wisdom to protect what mattered most. Officer Ruiz's call came at 6 in the morning, while Sofia was getting ready for another day of teaching. His voice carried an urgency that made her sit down on Emma's guest bed, one hand automatically moving to her belly. Sofia, we need you to come to the station today. We've executed a search warrant on David's computer and found some things you need to see. The police station felt different this time, less like a place Sofia had been brought for protection and more like the headquarters of an investigation she was only beginning to understand. Detective Laura Kim, a specialist in domestic violence cases, led Sofia and Sarah Martinez into a small conference room where a laptop computer sat open on the table. Mrs. Clarke, Detective Kim began carefully, what I'm about to show you is disturbing, but it's also crucial evidence for your case. Are you prepared for that? Sofia nodded, though she couldn't imagine what could be worse than what she'd already experienced. David's violence had been terrifying, but at least it had been direct, immediate, something she could see coming and try to avoid. Detective Kim turned the laptop screen towards Sofia. We found an extensive surveillance system on David's computer, video files going back almost 5 years. The first video that played showed Sofia in their kitchen, preparing dinner with the careful movements of someone aware she was being watched. But Sofia remembered this night differently. She'd thought David was working late at a job site. She'd actually enjoyed the solitude, humming to herself as she cooked, feeling momentarily free from the constant tension that characterized her marriage. He had cameras hidden throughout your house, Detective Kim explained. Kitchen, living, room, bedroom, even the bathroom. You were being recorded constantly without your knowledge or consent. Sofia stared at the screen, watching herself move through her own home like an unwitting performer in David's private theater. The invasion felt deeper than physical violence. This was a violation of her mind, her spirit, her basic right to exist without being observed and judged. How many hours of footage? Sarah asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. Thousands, Detective Kim replied. David was documenting your daily routines, your phone calls, your private moments, but that's not the worst part. The detective opened another folder on the computer. We also found detailed written plans. David was planning to escalate his control significantly after the baby was born. Sofia's hands began to shake as Detective Kim read from David's handwritten notes. Sofia, too independent lately. Pregnancy making her think she has options. After baby comes, we'll need to isolate her completely. Move to rural property where she can't work, can't call for help easily. Baby will keep her dependent. The words hit Sofia like physical blows. For months, she'd been questioning her decision to leave, wondering if she'd overreacted to one bad night. Now she saw the truth. That night hadn't been an explosion of temper, but a preview of something much worse to come. There's more, Detective Kim continued, her voice gentler now. David had been systematically sabotaging your relationships for years. He created fake social media accounts to send inflammatory messages to your friends, making them think you were gossiping about them or criticizing their lives. Sofia remembered the gradual drift of friendships, the way people had stopped calling, stopped including her in gatherings. She'd blamed herself, assumed she'd become boring or difficult to be around. Jenny, she whispered, thinking of her best friend from teaching who'd stopped speaking to her 3 years earlier after a mysterious falling out Sofia had never understood. Jennifer Morrison. Detective Kim consulted her notes. Yes, David sent her several messages from a fake account using your name, including some very personal information about her divorce that only a close friend would know. Sofia felt sick. How did he know about Jenny's divorce? The bedroom cameras picked up your phone conversations. David was listening to every private conversation you had, then using that information to destroy your relationships from the inside. Sarah Martinez was taking furious notes, her professional calm finally cracking. This is beyond domestic violence. This is stalking, surveillance, and harassment on a massive scale. David wasn't just controlling Sofia's present, he was systematically destroying her ability to have a future without him. The financial records Detective Kim showed them next revealed another layer of manipulation. David had been forging Sofia's signature on bank documents, opening credit cards in her name, and deliberately damaging her credit score so she would be unable to qualify for apartments or loans on her own. He's been planning this for years, Sofia said, her voice hollow with shock. Every time I thought about leaving, every obstacle I encountered, he created most of them. There's one more thing, Detective Kim said, hesitating. David's browsing history shows extensive research into postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and legal grounds for questioning a mother's fitness to care for her child. Sofia felt the room spin around her. He was planning to take the baby. The notes suggest he was researching how to document your mental instability after childbirth, possibly to petition for full custody while having you committed for psychiatric evaluation. Sarah's pen snapped in her hand. This isn't domestic violence anymore. This is a systematic campaign to destroy a person's entire existence. We're talking about charges of stalking, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Sofia sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of David's deception. She'd spent years blaming herself for the deterioration of her life, assuming her isolation was the natural consequence of her own inadequacy. Learning that David had engineered her loneliness, her financial dependence, her damaged relationships, it was like discovering that her entire reality had been a carefully constructed lie. Mrs. Clarke, Detective Kim said gently, I need you to understand something. What you experienced wasn't just abuse. It was a level of psychological manipulation that would have destroyed most people long before you found the strength to call for help. The fact that you survived this, that you protected your daughter and found the courage to leave, that's extraordinary. Sofia's daughter kicked hard, as if responding to the revelation. For months, Sofia had carried guilt about breaking up the family about depriving her daughter of a father. Now she understood that she hadn't destroyed anything. She'd escaped from a prison. David had spent years constructing around them both. "What happens now?" Sofia asked. "Now we build a case that ensures David never has the opportunity to hurt you or anyone else ever again," Sarah replied firmly. "With this evidence, we're looking at felony charges that could result in significant prison time." As they left the police station, Sofia felt simultaneously violated and liberated. The discovery of David's surveillance system was horrifying, but it also validated every instinct that had told her something was deeply wrong with her marriage. She hadn't been paranoid or oversensitive. She'd been living under the constant observation of someone who saw her not as a human being with rights and autonomy, but as a possession to be controlled and manipulated. That night, Sofia sat in Emma's guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the David she'd thought she'd married with the predator the evidence revealed. The man who'd brought her flowers during their courtship had been studying her even then, learning her vulnerabilities so he could exploit them later. But as her daughter shifted and turned inside her, Sofia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: clarity. David's elaborate system of control had ultimately contained the seeds of its own destruction. His compulsive need to document everything had created an undeniable record of his crimes. Tomorrow, Sofia would have to testify about the worst period of her life, but tonight she finally understood that escaping hadn't been an overreaction to one violent episode. It had been a narrow escape from a fate far worse than anything she'd previously imagined. At 38 weeks pregnant, Sofia could barely see her feet as she stood before the bathroom mirror in Emma's house, practicing the words she would speak in court tomorrow. The birth plan, tucked into her pregnancy journal, had become more than a medical document. It was a symbol of her faith that the future could be different from the past, that her daughter could enter a world where safety was the foundation rather than the exception. "I need you to know that testifying while this pregnant carries risks," Dr. Henderson had explained during Sofia's final prenatal appointment. "Your blood pressure is elevated, which is understandable given the stress you're under. If you go into labor during or immediately after the trial, we need to be prepared for complications." Sofia had considered asking for a postponement, but Sarah Martinez had explained that delays favored the defense. "David's lawyer is hoping something will happen to prevent your testimony," Sarah had said bluntly. "Time allows witnesses to forget details, evidence to be questioned, and public sympathy to shift toward the accused." Emma knocked softly on the guest room door. "Mum's here," she said. "She flew in from Phoenix this morning." Sofia's mother, Maria Martinez, stood in the kitchen looking older than her 62 years, her face creased with worry and something that might have been shame. She'd spent weeks on the phone with David's family, trying to broker some kind of reconciliation that would avoid the public spectacle of a trial. "Mija," her mother said, pulling Sofia into a careful embrace that accommodated her swollen belly. "Are you sure this is what you want? Once you testify in court, there's no taking it back. The whole community will know your private business." Sofia had heard variations of this argument from dozens of well-meaning friends and family members. The idea that her privacy was worth more than her safety, that public shame was worse than private violence, that somehow she owed David protection from the consequences of his own actions. "Mom," Sofia said gently, "the whole community already knows. They've known for years. The difference is that now they're going to hear the truth instead of whatever story David's been telling." Officer Ruiz arrived that afternoon to review the security arrangements for tomorrow's trial. David's escalating violations of the restraining order had convinced the court to take extra precautions, but Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that legal protection was like an umbrella in a hurricane, better than nothing, but ultimately inadequate against the full force of David's rage. "He'll be in custody during the trial," Officer Ruiz explained, "but his family and friends will be in the courtroom. Some of them believe his version of events, and they may try to intimidate you through their presence if not their actions." Sofia nodded. thinking of Margaret's latest voicemail, which had combined maternal disappointment with barely veiled threats about what would happen to Sofia's reputation if she persisted in this vendetta against a good man. That evening, the women from Sofia's support group gathered at Emma's house for what Dr. Torres called a strength circle, a ritual they performed before any member faced a major challenge in their recovery journey. The living room filled with women ranging in age from 23 to 68, each carrying their own stories of survival and rebuilding. "Tell us what you need to hear tonight," Dr. Torres said, settling into the circle with the calm presence that had guided Sofia through months of healing. Sofia looked around the room at faces she'd come to know intimately, women who'd shared their darkest moments and their brightest hopes, who'd held space for each other's pain without trying to fix or minimize it. "I need to know that telling the truth matters," Sofia said slowly. "Even when it's ugly, even when it makes people uncomfortable, even when it costs me relationships I've been trying to preserve." Patricia, a 60-year-old retired nurse who'd left her husband after 40 years of marriage, leaned forward. "Honey, I spent 4 decades protecting a man's reputation at the expense of my own soul. The day I finally told people what really happened behind our closed doors was the day I got my life back." "But what if they don't believe me?" Sofia asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since the trial date was set. "David is so good at seeming reasonable, so skilled at making me look like the problem." Carmen, a young mother who'd escaped an abusive relationship with 2 toddlers, in tow, spoke up. "They don't all have to believe you, Sofia. The jury just has to hear the truth and see the evidence. And even if some people choose to believe David's lies, you'll know that you spoke up for yourself and your daughter. That's what matters." Dr. Torres pulled out a small wrapped package. "The group has something for you," she said, handing it to Sofia. Inside was a simple silver pendant in the shape of a tree, its roots deep and branches reaching upward. The back was engraved with words from Maya Angelou. "The moment a child is born, the mother is also born." "We wanted you to have something to hold tomorrow," explained Janet, whose husband had been convicted 6 months earlier after she'd found the courage to report his abuse. "Something to remind you that whatever happens in that courtroom, you've already won. You've already broken the cycle. You've already become the mother your daughter needs." Sofia clutched the pendant, feeling its weight as both anchor and wings. Tomorrow she would face David in a courtroom filled with people who thought they knew their story. She would speak words that would be recorded and preserved, that would become part of the public record of who she was and what she'd endured. But tonight, surrounded by women who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, Sofia felt ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Emma found her later that evening, sitting in the nursery she'd set, up in the spare bedroom, assembling the last pieces of the crib that had traveled from Denver. The room was painted soft yellow, gender-neutral, but somehow perfectly feminine, with touches that spoke of hope rather than fear. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Emma asked, settling into the rocking chair Sofia had bought at a thrift store and refinished herself. "Terrified," Sofia admitted, "but also relieved. For so long, I've been carrying David's secrets, protecting his image, making excuses for his behavior. Tomorrow, I get to tell the truth and let him face the consequences of his own actions." "And after tomorrow?" Sofia placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's familiar movements. "After tomorrow, we start our real life. No more looking over our shoulders. No more wondering if today will be the day he finally goes too far. Just us, building something new." As if in response to her words, Sofia felt a strong contraction that took her breath away. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was unmistakably different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. "Was that?" Emma began. "I think so," Sofia said, breathing through another wave of tightness across her abdomen. "But it's too early. I'm only 38 weeks, and the trial is tomorrow." Emma reached for the phone. I'm calling Dr. Henderson." "Wait," Sofia said, grabbing her sister's hand. "Let's see if they continue. If this baby is coming, she's coming. But I'm not going to spend the night in a hospital worried about labor pains that might be nothing more than stress." They sat together in the quiet nursery, timing contractions that came irregularly but with increasing intensity. Sofia found herself thinking about timing, how her daughter seemed determined to arrive at the most complicated possible moment, how the two most important events of Sofia's life were converging in a way that felt both impossible and inevitable. "Maybe she knows," Sofia said as another contraction peaked and faded. "Maybe she wants to be here when I finally stand up to her father. Maybe she's tired of waiting for us to be safe." Emma squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whether you're in a courtroom or a delivery room, you're going to be magnificent. You've already proven you can do impossible things." As midnight approached, the contractions slowed and eventually stopped, leaving Sofia exhausted but oddly peaceful. Her daughter had given her a preview of what was coming. New life, new beginnings, new possibilities that didn't include fear. As a daily companion, tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight Sofia felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she was no longer fighting alone. The courthouse steps seemed impossibly steep as Sofia climbed them at 9 o'clock on a grey Tuesday morning, her hand gripping Officer Ruiz's arm for support. At 38 weeks pregnant, every movement required careful consideration. But the weight of her testimony felt heavier than her physical burden. The witness stand looked exactly like Sofia had imagined during her sleepless nights. A simple wooden chair positioned to face both the jury and the gallery where David's family sat in the front row, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to openly hostile. David himself sat at the defendant's table, wearing a navy suit that made him look like the successful businessman he'd once been, rather than the man who'd terrorized his pregnant wife. "Please state your name for the record," Sarah Martinez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd prosecuted dozens of these cases. "Sofia Elena Clarke," Sofia replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. She touched the silver tree pendant at her throat, feeling its weight as a reminder of the women who'd helped her find the courage to speak. "Mrs. Clarke, how long were you married to the defendant?" 8 years, Sofia said, looking directly at the jury rather than at David. Dr. Torres had coached her on this, to remember that she was speaking to 12 strangers who needed to understand her truth, not to the man who'd tried to silence her. "During those 8 years, did your husband ever strike you?" The question hung in the air like a bridge Sofia had been building toward for months. "Yes, multiple times." "Can you describe the most recent incident that led to your calling 911? Sofia closed her eyes briefly, returning to that night when everything had finally shifted. "David came home drunk after losing a construction contract. When I suggested he might benefit from counseling, he became enraged. He hit me across the face hard enough to split my lip, then shoved me into the coffee table. I was 7 months pregnant at the time." "What made this incident different from previous attacks?" "My baby kicked when he hit me," Sofia said, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. She was moving frantically, like she was trying to protect me, and I realized that in a few months I would be responsible for keeping her safe. How could I do that if I couldn't even keep myself safe? David's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, approached the cross-examination with the calculated sympathy Sofia had been warned to expect. "Mrs. Clarke, you were under significant hormonal and emotional stress during your pregnancy, weren't you?" "I was under stress," Sofia agreed carefully. "The stress of being beaten by my husband. But pregnancy hormones can affect perception, can't they? Make situations seem more threatening than they actually are." Sofia felt her daughter kick, as if protesting the suggestion that her existence had somehow distorted Sofia's judgment. "Mr. Patterson, pregnancy didn't make me imagine the bruises on my body or the destruction in my living room. Pregnancy didn't create the surveillance cameras your client hid throughout our house, or forge my signature on financial documents. Patterson's expression tightened. He'd clearly hoped to paint Sofia as an hysterical pregnant woman, but the evidence made that narrative impossible to sustain. Mrs. Clarke, why did you wait so long to report the abuse if it was as serious as you claim? This was the question Sofia had dreaded most, the one that went to the heart of why victims stayed with their abusers. Because David convinced me that I was the problem, she said quietly. Because he isolated me from my friends and family so gradually that I didn't realize it was happening. Because he made me financially dependent on him. Because every time I tried to leave, he promised to change, and I wanted to believe him. But you had opportunities to seek help earlier, didn't you? I sought help the only way I knew how, Sofia replied. I called 911 3 times before the night that led to these charges. Each time I was too afraid to press charges because David had convinced me that no one would believe me, that I would lose everything if I tried to leave him. What changed your mind? Sofia looked directly at David for the first time since taking the stand. His face showed no emotion, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused or the life he'd nearly destroyed. I realized that my daughter deserved better, Sofia said simply. She deserved to grow up in a home where love didn't come with bruises, where her mother's value wasn't determined by how well she managed her father's temper. I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting our family. It was enabling David to hurt us both. As Sofia stepped down from the witness stand, she felt something shift inside her that had nothing to do with pregnancy. For 8 years, she'd carried David's secrets, protected his reputation, absorbed his violence in silence. Today, she'd spoken truth to power and lived to tell about it. The jury's faces showed a mixture of sympathy, anger, and something that looked like respect. Whatever they decided, Sofia had done what she came to do. She'd told her story and trusted others to recognize truth when they heard it. The jury had been deliberating for 3 hours when Sofia's contractions began in earnest. She was sitting in Sarah Martinez's office, trying to stay calm while they waited for the verdict, when the first wave of pain doubled her over with an intensity that left no doubt. Her daughter was coming. That's not a practice contraction, Emma said, checking her watch as Sofia breathed through the peak. We need to get you to the hospital. I can't leave, Sofia protested even as another contraction began building. What if the jury comes? Back with a verdict? Officer Ruiz appeared in the doorway, having noticed the commotion from the hallway. Sofia, that baby isn't going to wait for the legal system. We need to get you medical attention now. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and anticipation. Sofia found herself caught between 2 overwhelming experiences, bringing life into the world, while waiting to learn whether justice would be served for the violence that had nearly destroyed that same life. Dr. Henderson met them at the emergency entrance, her face a mixture of professional concern and personal investment. She'd been following Sofia's case through the news, understanding better than most how this trial represented not just legal proceedings, but a woman's fight for her daughter's future. How far apart are the contractions? Dr. Henderson asked, as they wheeled Sofia into the delivery room. 4 minutes, Emma replied, having timed them with the precision of someone who'd given birth 3 times herself. Sofia's phone rang as the medical team prepared for what was clearly going to be a rapid delivery. Sarah Martinez's voice was tight with excitement and exhaustion. Sofia, the jury's reached a verdict. They're about to read it in court. Put it on speaker. Sofia managed between contractions, gripping Emma's hand as another wave of pain crested and broke. The courtroom audio crackled through the phone as the judge called the court to order. Sofia could hear David's family murmuring in the background, their voices carrying the tension of people whose world was about to shift irrevocably. As the jury reached a verdict, the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," came the foreman's response. Sofia pushed through another contraction as the verdict was read, her daughter's insistence on being born mixing with her own desperate need to hear David's fate sealed. On the charge of domestic violence in the 1st degree, we find the defendant guilty. Emma squeezed Sofia's hand harder as more charges were read. Stalking, violation of a restraining order, financial fraud, invasion of privacy. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each verdict felt like a validation of every moment of fear Sofia had endured. Every night she'd lain awake wondering if she was overreacting or if her instincts were trying to save her life. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. This last charge, related to David's documented plans to isolate Sofia and potentially take custody of their daughter through false claims of mental illness, hit Sofia like a physical blow. The jury had seen through David's manipulations to the predator beneath. Officer Ruiz's voice came through clearly as the judge announced the sentencing hearing would be scheduled for the following month. "Sofia, they got him! All charges! He's going to prison for a long time!" Sofia's response was lost in a cry of pain as the strongest contraction yet gripped her body. Dr. Henderson looked up from her position at the foot of the bed, her face alit with professional satisfaction. "Sofia, your daughter is crowning. On the next contraction, I need you to push." For the next 20 minutes, Sofia's world narrowed to the elemental work of bringing life into the world. The courthouse, the verdict, even her own recent trauma faded into background as her body performed the ancient work of birth with primal efficiency. At 4:17 p.m. on the day, David Clarke was convicted of multiple felonies. Elena Sofia Clarke entered the world weighing 6 pounds, 8 ounces, with a healthy cry that filled the delivery room with pure possibility. "She's perfect," Dr. Henderson announced, placing the baby on Sofia's chest with the reverence reserved for miracles. "Absolutely perfect." Sofia looked down at her daughter's face, wrinkled and red and impossibly beautiful, and felt something shift in her chest that went beyond physical recovery from childbirth. This was transformation at the cellular level, the moment when survival became triumph, when victim became victor. Elena's eyes opened briefly, dark and alert, seeming to take in her new surroundings with the calm assessment of someone who'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to arrive. She'd been born on the day justice was served, entering a world where her father's violence had been acknowledged and punished, where her mother's truth had been heard and believed. "Hello, beautiful girl," Sofia whispered, tears streaming down her face as she touched Elena's impossibly small fingers. "Welcome to our new life." Officer Ruiz wiped his own eyes as he looked at mother and daughter together. "Sofia, you did it. You saved both of your lives." The judge's gavel had fallen hours ago, but Sofia felt like her real victory was just beginning. 6 months later, Sofia stood at the front of her third-grade classroom at Maplewood Elementary, watching 28 faces look up at her with the mixture of curiosity and trust that reminded her daily why she'd chosen teaching as her profession. The new teaching contract in her desk drawer represented more than employment. It was proof that she'd rebuilt her life from the ground up, creating stability and purpose that belonged entirely to her. Elena gurgled contentedly in the carrier, strapped to Sofia's chest, having become an unofficial classroom mascot during the final weeks of the school year. The principal had initially worried about the arrangement, but Elena's presence had somehow made the children more focused, more gentle, more aware that they were witnessing something precious. "Ms. Sofia," said Marcus, now 11 and Sofia's most devoted helper, "Elena's smiling at me again. I think she knows I'm her favorite." Sofia laughed, adjusting the carrier so Elena could see Marcus better. "She lights up whenever you talk to her, Marcus. You have a gift with babies." Marcus beamed with pride that went beyond the simple pleasure of being noticed. Over the past months, Sofia had watched him transform from a defensive child who expected abandonment into a confident student who believed in his own worth. His progress reminded her daily that healing was possible, that broken trust could be rebuilt with patience and consistency. The teaching certificate that now hung in Sofia's apartment, the same one Emma had preserved during Sofia's darkest years, had become a symbol of resurrection rather than mere qualification. Every morning when she saw it, Sofia remembered the woman she'd been before David's control had nearly erased her, and the woman she was becoming in freedom. That afternoon, Sofia received a call that she'd been both expecting and dreading. David's sentencing hearing had been scheduled for the following week. With all the charges combined, domestic violence, stalking, financial fraud, conspiracy, he was facing 15 to 20 years in prison. The thought of seeing him again, even in a courtroom surrounded by guards, still made Sofia's chest tighten with anxiety. "You don't have to attend," Sarah Martinez had assured her during their last meeting. "The judge has your victim impact statement, and your testimony during the trial was compelling enough to secure the conviction. Your presence at sentencing is entirely your choice." But Sofia had decided she wanted to be there, wanted to look David in the eye one final time, as his own actions determined his fate. Elena would stay with Emma, safe from any exposure to the violence that had preceded her birth. Officer Ruiz had become more than law enforcement in Sofia's life. He was a friend, a protective presence, and a reminder that there were good men in the world who used their strength to shield rather than harm. He visited weekly, ostensibly to check on Sofia's safety, but really to hold Elena and tell her stories about his own children, now grown with families of their own. "She's going to be a heartbreaker," he said during his latest visit, watching Eleanor track his movements with alert dark eyes. "But more importantly, she's going to be strong. Look at how steady she is, how she takes in everything around her. That's the confidence of a child who's never known fear." Sofia treasured these observations, storing them away like gifts for her daughter's future. Elena would grow up knowing she was wanted, protected, celebrated, not as an extension of someone else's ego, but as a complete person in her own right. The domestic violence support group had evolved into something deeper than therapy for Sofia. These women had become her chosen family, gathering monthly not just to process trauma, but to celebrate victories, mark milestones, and prove to each other that life after abuse could be beautiful rather than merely survivable. "Look what you've built," Dr. Torres said as they sat in Emma's backyard, watching Eleanor sleep peacefully in the late afternoon sun. 6 months ago, you were terrified to make decisions for yourself. Now, you're raising a daughter, managing a classroom, and speaking at conferences about domestic violence awareness. The speaking engagements had started small. A brief presentation to nursing students about recognizing signs of abuse. But word had spread about Sofia's articulate, honest approach to discussing domestic violence, and she'd been invited to address women's groups, law enforcement training sessions, and social workers throughout the state. "I want other women to know that leaving isn't the end of the story," Sofia explained to audiences who listened with the rapt attention of people recognizing their own experiences in her words. "It's the beginning of discovering who you are when you're not afraid. It's learning that your voice matters, that your safety isn't negotiable, that love should never require you to disappear." Elena stirred in her sleep, making the small sounds that never failed to melt Sofia's heart. At 6 months old, she was a happy baby who smiled easily, slept well, and seemed to carry none of the stress that had marked her prenatal development. She was growing up in a house where voices weren't raised in anger, where her mother's needs mattered, where love was expressed through gentle care rather than control. Sofia's relationship with her family had healed in ways that surprised everyone. Her mother, initially resistant to the legal proceedings, had become Elena's most devoted grandmother, flying in from Arizona monthly to help with childcare. The experience of watching Sofia rebuild her life had shifted Maria's understanding of what strength looked like, what protection meant. "I was wrong," her mother had admitted during one of these visits. "I thought keeping the family together was more important than keeping you safe. I didn't understand that some things are more broken than they appear, and some breaks are necessary for real healing to begin." Even Sofia's relationship with her former in-laws had found an unexpected peace. Margaret had written a letter after David's conviction not to apologize exactly, but to acknowledge that she'd chosen to see what she wanted to see rather than what was actually happening. She'd asked for the chance to know her granddaughter when Sofia felt ready, understanding that any relationship would be on Sofia's terms entirely. As summer approached, Sofia found herself making plans that extended beyond simple survival. She was considering pursuing a master's degree in educational therapy, specializing in trauma-informed teaching for children who'd experienced abuse. The idea of turning her own healing into a tool for helping others felt like the completion of a circle she'd been unconsciously drawing since the night she'd first called 911. Elena woke from her nap as the sun began to set, looking around with the alert curiosity that characterized all her waking moments. Sofia lifted her daughter from the carrier and held her up to see the changing colors in the sky, explaining the beauty of sunset as if Eleanor could understand every word. "This is what peace looks like," Sofia whispered to her daughter. "This is what it means to live without fear, to build something beautiful from the pieces of what was broken. This is what I want you to remember about love, that it should feel like coming home to yourself, not like disappearing into someone else's needs." Elena reached up with tiny fingers, touching Sofia's face with the gentle exploration of someone, discovering the world one moment at a time. In that touch, Sofia felt the future opening before them, like a path through a garden they would tend together. A life built on truth rather than secrets, courage rather than fear, and the unshakable knowledge that they were both exactly where they belonged.